Hello and welcome to the trade setup. In this video we are looking at MP materials. It is time for another update, and it is finally time for the rare earth stocks to be making a return play, as we have been patiently waiting for the internal corrections to materialize within these stocks. Those are now in place. We have no need for any further lows, and not only that, but we have even gotten a shorter term indication that a more substantial bottom would be in place. We have an opportunity that could materialize in the relatively short term, right? The next few days. Maybe it will take even a few weeks. I cannot tell you exactly. I just wanted to highlight that I'm not talking about hours when it comes to this. But I am looking for this overall uptrend to be resuming. I am looking for a trade setup internally to the point where I almost don't even care about the rest of the structure of this chart. We can even focus strictly on this movement to the upside. I have several options of how I could be tracking this development. I could track it as a diagonal structure. Even in a few ways here, I could be looking at a series of 1-2 setups, to be honest. Also a perfectly valid scenario. But in reality, it does not matter, not until we get at least one more high within the smaller time frame, and no, not from the current levels. That would be ludicrous for us. We always want to get a better deal than that. But from internal levels of support, we would be tracking within this structure. I am looking strictly at this movement to the upside from the end of March low, where I can identify an initial 5-wave pattern within the area of a leading diagonal. It's not going to be the nicest structure, it's not going to be the most clear 5-wave pattern. I am tracking it as a leading diagonal, as I was saying, but I believe the trade setup can prove quite lucrative because it clearly defines the levels of support we would be tracking for this to still be able to allow a reversal to higher prices. I know that if I get a sustained break below $50 at the 78.6% retracement, most likely this pattern will fail. This allows me to execute strategic positioning within this chart, where I can position myself in such a way where if I get the sustained break below this level, I can define my losses, I can cut my losses, and I don't even need to risk that much to actually capture a quite rewarding return in the case of a successful trade setup from these levels. Because this is not a prediction that this structure will succeed, but this framework, these levels, these patterns allow us to identify a high probability structure, as good as any in my opinion, and provide to us extremely favorable risk-reward ratios when looking for a trade setup. And of course, as we move lower and lower within such a support zone, those would continue to improve and improve to the point where we might get to the last level of support. The risk would be decently close to zero. And I'm talking relatively because in the case of this chart, if I enter, let's say, at $51, I might want to place my stop loss a little bit below that. Maybe I want to allow even this 5-6% drop before actually getting stopped out of this position. Sure, 6% is not zero. As I was saying, this is relative. But the actual potential of entering from such levels, even in the case of a mere wave C, could very, very easily surpass a 10 times return on the amount I was risking, right? If I were to buy at $51, I would be risking, let's say, 6%. Well, the ideal target, even for a wave C, would be the 100% extension of the wave A. That sits at $88. That is beyond the estimated 60% potential we have defined a moment ago. Right? And of course, again, these structures can fail. This is not a prediction that it will succeed in forming these highs, but it is the potential that is extremely interesting because we do not need to be right even remotely close to 50% of the time to be profitable with such a strategy. In reality, if this manages to build a 5-wave pattern, as I would ideally like to see here, the ideal target for the wave 3 is the 138.2% extension of the wave 1 that sits at $109. Now, within this correction, our primary expectation is to form a 3-wave pattern, right? This is our general expectation within wave 2. We also want to reach our area of support. And if we actually take these two together, we can actually notice we have fulfilled both of these expectations, right? We have 3 waves down, we have reached the first level of support, and sure, we've had a reaction, but I'm not too convinced the bottom is in yet. I would generally expect a slightly larger correction within this as a larger wave 2. Yeah, generally decently larger than what I would have within the internal structure, within, let's say, this as an internal wave 4 to occur within this development. And based on what is currently available internally in this area, we unfortunately do not get the most useful information. I could track this quite easily as a pretty simple A, B, C pattern, and what has so far already formed within this as a wave C is rather short. The ideal target for a wave C remains the 100% extension of the wave A, even in the case of such a structure, and that sits at $59. It doesn't need to stop there, it doesn't need to get there, but if we only get to the 61.8% extension as we have so far done, I will lean towards favoring further lows. It doesn't need to be exactly within this structure, but as long as we do not get to break internal levels of resistance we would track for a potential internal 1-2 setup in this structure, which go all the way up to $68.6, I would personally still prefer to be extending to lower prices, ideally within this idea of an impulse. And don't expect to get the most clear picture of this correction, as I was saying. It can form a different pattern, it can build even quite complex corrections at times, so I would rather focus on the levels, but as it stands right now, there is no clear indication of a bottom being in place. The movement so far up is only in 3 waves. We also have a pretty decisive movement in the last trading hour yesterday, and it seems even likely that this trend will continue to lower prices for a little bit longer. And before we end the video, one small disclaimer on the timeline itself. Yes, I do prefer this to extend a little bit longer time-wise. I do prefer this to extend its correction more. But it does happen at times that instead we may form a rather swifter bottom. So if you are certain you want to get an entry within this area, especially as we reach the levels of the previous wave 4 low, a core position might not be a bad idea. And even if I strongly prefer to extend lower, I cannot guarantee, for example, that we wouldn't form something like a WXY, where, yeah, we might be bottoming within this next low into structural support at these levels around $60. And for now, we will stop here. These are the levels, this is the trade setup. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and if you enjoyed the content and want to support it directly, check out the channel membership, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.